All right, if I could have folks' attention, we are moving on to the next panel. It's wonderful to see so many folks here. For those students, you can be warned now that we will look to you for the first question, so take good notes. We have a wonderful panel here representing folks from government, academia, and practice. Particularly glad to welcome our local patent office leader. Russ started 3 months ago. So he is a little bit of an import. He was in Idaho, an incredible leader in the world of patents. Julie is from Maryland, is that right? DC. She had been, were you here when we had the Startup America convention? She was head of the Startup.
No, I didn't make it to that one, but yeah, I was part of it then.
George has been a long-time Silicon Flatiron's friend and family member, practicing patent lawyer in town. And finally, Steve VanNurden, who is at the Anschutz Redevelopment Authority, or has it changed your, that's still the same basic deal. He, before that, had been at the Mayo Clinic. So we talk about tech transfer. Mayo Clinic has something to teach us all, and we're thrilled to have him here in Colorado as well. So I want to start by a basic question that any university has. It's true in private settings as well, but we'll talk about the university context, which is you've got all these inventors, all these knowledge producers, if you will, throughout the institution, and we have the challenge of how do we reach them, and how do we help them develop, depending on what word you want to use, an entrepreneurial mindset about what's possible, or patent and IP awareness, because many inventors want to do their research, publish, and be left alone. And so there's this culture challenge that tech transfer operations have to figure out how to engage. Let me start with Steve, because you, like I said, were at the Mayo Clinic and have had to work on this, and now you've been brought in to help us here in Colorado raise our game. So how do you go ahead about addressing that challenge?
Well, a couple things. One, that's been an interesting conversation from the previous one that I've heard for 25 years now. Should the tech transfer office be a business, or should they be a service to the faculty? And there can be, and that will rage on, I think. But one of the things, in my opinion, would be is you have to be one or the other. And where tech transfer offices get in trouble is where they try to be all things to all people. And so the president of the university will think, well, of course you should run it like a business because we need the money because the state's down. And then the inventor says, well, no, you should be a service to the faculty.
Or Kate, right? That's the dilemma, is these competing pressures.
And in my opinion, you just need to pick. It's like when you deal with small companies. I've been involved in about 50 small companies where they don't have a focus. So one day they're this, and the next day they're that, and the third day they're something else, and the next day that they think they should develop another product, where focus really is important. So to me, it shouldn't be the debate of one or the other. It should be you pick what is your mission, you get senior leadership to agree on what your mission is, and then you stay focused with that. And depending on what that focus is then how you staff what you need to staff and what needs to be what's the most important thing. But being all things to all people, I've tried to do that, and I failed miserably.
So Steve, to clarify that, and this will be highly anecdotal, so when I make the mistake, please correct me. Stanford, at least as an impressionistic matter, is often said to have been in the service model, so that when Google develops its business, Stanford's tech transfer office is not trying to keep ownership, but instead is how do we help you succeed, really almost on faith that somehow it'll come back to them, like Google will donate them a lot of money, which ends up happening. Berkeley is known by contrast as, okay, we own this patent portfolio and we're going to aggressively monetize it in a little bit more of the business model fashion. Just as two stylized models, is that helpful to think about as a way to explain what you're talking about?
Well, the way I would look at it when I was at the Mayo Clinic is we had a singular focus on how to get these technologies to patients. So how do you benefit patients?
Not necessarily how do we make the most money, how do we get them?
How do you benefit patients? And so if you have a singular focus like that, in fact, I've been involved in two different things where because we wanted to get these technologies to patients, we sued for patent infringement.
So patent was a tool to help accomplish your mission.
Right. But on the other hand, I was involved in the Mayo Clinic versus Prometheus case. And that's just the opposite, because in our view, that did not benefit patients. And so we went to the U.S. Supreme Court on almost exactly the opposite issue, all because of one thing: what is the best benefit to the patient? And so by focusing on that, and we did believe that the money would come if you focus on that, and it did. But it gives you a contrast of, on one side, you could say, well, you're being hypocritical. You sued the pants off of somebody because of patent infringement. And on the other hand, then you said, well, you shouldn't be able to patent genes and patent things like results like, you can't patent cholesterol test of, 120 over, or high blood pressure 120 over 80. And so that's what the Prometheus case was for in our particular case. And so if you have that focus and you're true to that focus, then patenting is just a means to where you want to achieve what you're trying to do.
So Julie, you were nodding on this point, and I take it in your case, the question would be, do you look at your mission in terms of empowering and supporting entrepreneurs? And if so, what are the implications of that?
You mean from a tech transfer office
Yes.
perspective? I was nodding because what I found really compelling is this whole concept of tying to your mission and tying to why, and then figuring out how you get there. That's how businesses need to be, so it's a very entrepreneurial problem that they're trying to solve. But the tech transfer office, I think you're right. They have to pick what their why is. Why are they in business, and then operate in that model. There's not necessarily any right or wrong answer, because they're trying to achieve different things. From the perspective now, I kind of chuckled when you said, here representing the federal government, and I was looking around going, who would that be? Oh, right, it's me. I've been with the federal government for 5 months now, and I was an entrepreneur. I'm a recovering entrepreneur, and not recovering very well. And so it's an interesting position to be in. Having been on the entrepreneur side of technology transfer, it can be very challenging working with inventors. I think in the first panel they were talking about that nobody wants to hear that your baby's ugly. And that goes for inventors in universities and federal labs, and just kids off the street that think they have the next best app. That they, you can't tell them, no, that's not a good idea. They get very offended. But I think if your vision is that you want to, in the case of the Mayo Clinic, we want to get this technology out. I mean, that's very strong. You look at how do you do that? If the point is that you are a moneymaker for the university, then that's what you're going to focus on. How successful are you going to be? I don't know. How many successful, tech transfer offices do you know where that's all they focus on? I'd be curious. Very few.
This is called the Gatorade problem. For those who want to know the source of this, there was a football coach at the University of Florida who noticed his football players had a hard time staying hydrated, and he collaborated with some other one person on campus, and they came up with Gatorade, and they patented it, and the University of Florida, Red Gators, made a ton of money. And so that's led to Gatorade envy. And despite the fact that it hasn't actually worked in many places, we're living with that legacy.
Yeah, and I think it's partly, it's just like entrepreneurs that go into business to say, I'm going to start a business just because I want to be rich and I want to make money. Very few entrepreneurs are actually successful that way. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that have made money, but there's a heck of a lot more that haven't. So, if you're in it just for the money, I'd love to hear of a model where that really works.
So, Russ, you had dealt with this in an industrial setting and at Micron. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experience?
Well, the first panel and this panel have already raised some very good points on strategy. From a corporate setting, when you're working with a Fortune 100 company, I already know what my fundamental strategy is, and that's to return value and equity to the owners or shareholders. So all of the decisions that I'd make would be driven by that fundamental, but that didn't mean I patented everything. If the technology were something that was fundamental to our research, that was best kept a trade secret, it gave lead time to us over our competitors, would it be something that I would need for exclusivity in the market? Is it something that's not even fundamental to us, but tangentially created? Each of those would come out with different results. So first, I had to have the fundamental, and I think that's what everybody's struggling with here. All inventions are not the same. All inventors are not the same. Some are motivated to create a startup. Some have the basic skill set needed to create a startup and lead it through its phases, or at least get a startup going. Some just want to be researchers. And in the corporate setting, I didn't have to deal with the spin-offs so much. I didn't have to deal with inventors that wanted to. Some wanted to, but that really wasn't an option in that setting. We had to educate the inventors on the strategy of the company and why we were not going to patent their inventions. And those that we did want to patent, we had to educate on the patent system, what the strategy was behind that particular patent. It may be, not all patents are created the same. And now that I'm with the Patent Office, I have to be careful on that perhaps, but the truth is what you invest and the strategy that you have at the beginning of protecting your intellectual property is going to result in the value at the end. I did in private practice, used to work for some universities in tech transfer and for NASA even. And unfortunately, sometimes the inventions would come to me and just say, here's an invention, please get us a patent on it, with a small amount of money to invest. And I understand on the university side, finances are very tight. But if you spread your finances out very thin, it's hard to get a patent that is valuable to your target audience, whatever that is. It's hard to walk into a large corporation and say, here's a patent, now please give us license. This is our way of getting it out into the public. But I'm starting to get a little tangent.
Yeah, that's good, because we're going to get there in a minute. Before we get there, George, you've been on the side of, working with lots of inventors. What are your thoughts on this question?
One of the things we've been dancing around a little bit is a patent's really a business tool or a tool. And you have to decide what your goals are before you know how to use that tool, or before you even know how to create it. And business is very clear. The tool, we're going to make money, and you've got lots of metrics. Is it tangential? Is it important? And that helps you determine how much money to invest and whether to even go forward with it. We heard in the last session, there's a lot of other goals that drive tech transfer offices. There's communication of the technology. There's communication that this university or is doing this kind of research. There's protecting yourself so that you're not sued 20 years from now for something you're doing today and developing today but didn't communicate. There's making money. I personally think that the tech transfer office is not, they're not looking at Gatorade. They're looking more at fear of missing out. That there's somebody out there making a bunch of money on their IP and it's not us, and we have to do something. And that's the wrong motivation to try to reorganize your tech transfer office. You need to decide what your goals are. As you said, pick get off the fence somewhere, say this is how we're going to set it up, and then run with it rather than being all things to all people. But that concept of a patent as a business tool is something that is central to patents, and without knowing what your goals are, you can't develop the tool.
So one of the challenges here, we've also been dancing around, is we're dealing with faculty members. Faculty members can be the most independent-minded people that we have on this earth. And unlike a researcher at Micron, they are not necessarily of the view that they have to do what a university administration would ask them to do. So the culture challenge is one of how do you present what you're doing in a way that fits with their identity. Entrepreneurs can be a little like this too.
I was just thinking, wow, that sounds very entrepreneurial.
And one of the challenges is if they feel like a tech transfer operation is basically a bureaucracy that makes their life difficult, like an entrepreneur, they're going to try to work around it.
Kind of like an entrepreneur in the government or something?
Exactly, in a good way. So how do you think about this challenge? How do you design ways of engaging faculty inventors that doesn't get viewed as a bureaucratic obstacle overhead, but gets viewed as something that is worth their time? Steve, you want to go first?
Sure. and I didn't think it would end up this way, but it ended up this way. So what we did is we brought the patent prosecution function in-house. And so I had 7 patent liaisons that were trained in science, actually trained in science where people knew who they were, and then we sent them to become a patent agent. And what was fascinating about that, we did that partly because of efficiencies, because it takes a long time to send something out to a patent attorney. They they try and get the right person to do patent searches, and there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that, and it was a very inefficient process. So we brought that in-house. But the unintended consequence is when you had the inventor, usually the first-time inventor, who thought they could get a patent and thought that was their ticket to gold. You know, once they thought they could get a patent, then their decision was, well, do I send my kids to Oxford or Harvard? Because I'm going to make all kinds of money because I have a patent. And so, and I remember this several times where they would disclose this in the morning. We'd do a patent search, a prior art search over the noon hour, and we'd drop 17 patents on their desk in the afternoon. And they'd go, you know what? If you have a way around this, you know, let's go at this. But until then, you know, look. And they would be very angry with me when I would do that.
This is
Told
like
them
your
their
child
baby
is
was
ugly?
ugly.
Is this
Yeah.
the same kind of
Yeah,
conversation?
your dog
Exactly.
won't hunt. Your dog, yeah, they would be very pissed off. But what was interesting, several months later, is they would come back to me. And they would say, thank you. And the reason why is because no researcher wants to be a me too. They want to do cutting edge work. They want to make a difference. And those patents, for the ones who read through them, really found out that there was somebody else already working on this. And it changed the direction of their research in a positive way. And some of them would actually come back with novel ideas. And so that patent liaison function was really done for business reasons. But it was such a great service that people would learn then over time that they would talk to our patent agents first and patent liaisons first and get a wealth of knowledge. We ended up saving $500,000 a year on filing useless patents, and the researcher became much more ingrained in and focused on the research to make a difference.
Julie?
Well, I think part of it is you get what you measure. And you know, I know of at least, and I don't know how you do it here, but in Texas, having commercialization and being involved in something that gets commercialized works towards tenure. So there's an incentive, there's an additional incentive. They're shown that that's something that's important to the university, and it helps them from a career perspective. I think the other thing that I've seen. We did a project with Johns Hopkins, their advanced physics lab in Maryland, and the director there was very interested in innovation and entrepreneurship, not because he wanted to lose his top researchers, but because he felt like it was a good attraction and retention tool, so that it would attract young talent who had great ideas and who wanted to see them out in the market, but then have, you know, them being a part of the company and getting some of the royalties and stuff, that was a way that they could kind of keep engaged and maybe stay and go invent something else. And so that whole mindset thing was, they're trying to build that entrepreneurial mindset, as you said. You know, I think by nature, researchers they're independent, they're possibility thinkers, you know, they're looking for possibilities. So, you know, how do you kind of do that for benefit of all? One more thing I wanted to add is that, you know, not all researchers, same way you have to have your why for your tech transfer office, not all researchers have the same motivations. They don't all want the same thing. So treating it as a one-size-fits-all, I think, is a problem. You have to understand, what is it that you're trying to get out of it? Why are you here? And then maybe there's not just one answer.
So this nicely tees up a question I had for Russ on this, which is the reality today, Brad probably mentioned this, we'll mention it, of how many PhD researchers are there per job? 10 to 1?
8 to 1.
8 to 1. Which means when you are taking PhD students, if you're responsible, you're realizing you're not going to place, you know, that many in jobs in the academic context. You're going to place them at Micron. So this service is in service of the PhDs being trained for what they might actually end up doing. And so Russ, I I know that you had the benefit of seeing that in Micron. How much did you have PhDs come into you from academia, knowing they're into researcher and already kind of trained to like think the way Steve talked about? And how much did you have to kind of train them to think about patenting?
I can't give you a quantitative number on that, but what I will say is that in the corporate setting, in many of the large corporations, we have what we call patent committees, in which I would have upwards of 10 or 12 patent committees specializing in different technologies spread across the organization, with the PhDs and the senior researchers leading different areas that would participate. They would volunteer their time every week for cookies and donuts and stuff, but they would volunteer their time, and that was an education both for them and for the new people coming in under them, because it wasn't necessarily a peer review, although in some ways it was. They helped do two things. They helped us identify which technologies had merit, which technologies, especially for some of those new inventors coming into the company, had already been tested and we had prior art on it that they didn't know about it. That may work in an academic setting to have the leaders in the university, because they get some experience on that business thinking. Why would we patent this? How would it be applicable? And what I would use the patent committees for is extending the invention beyond what the inventor thinks it is. Often a researcher or scientist is focused on solving that problem that Dr. Gold mentioned, solving the problem, but not necessarily seeing the applicability. So if a tech transfer really wants to maximize the return on that, if the goal is money, then it's not just patenting what the inventor said, but seeing that technique for depositing material is more than a technique for depositing material. It enables certain technologies that, in having that group discussion and that review, help in that. So how many PhDs came from the university that were prepared to think that way? Probably little.
It may change over time, and I love the way you explained it. It could be the case, and I'll put my cards on the table, that university says our goal is to have an impact, a little like Steve talked about patience, and to help people, entrepreneurs, solve problems. And we're not going to focus on money in a short-term perspective. If we end up making money, that's fine, but we're not doing it as that being our goal. Our goal is to help our researchers solve problems and have a positive impact, because technology transfer, knowledge dissemination, can be about having a positive impact, and patents are a tool to do that. One thing that you mentioned, Russ, which is really important, and I'll get to George too, is getting leaders, people like a Larry Gold or a Tom Check, to talk about how they view this and to play a key role in the process. When you have that, it can kind of build on itself. When you don't have that, you've got a culture change challenge. So, George, you've worked with lots of institutions. How do you compare this cultural divide, where you've got some institutions, which I think Steve talked about, what they did, Russ talked about it, you get that positive dynamic going. In other cases, people think this is all BS and a pain in the ass and they want to ignore it. It's really hard to turn that around. So how do you think about that?
Changing culture is incredibly difficult, but I think it starts with you've got to measure it. One of the things in industry, the employees and the business, their culture is pretty aligned. They know that if they don't do their jobs, and usually as a researcher in a corporation, a technology corporation, you're expected to generate IP and you're expected to follow through with the patents, and it's just part of your job. In academia, quite often, the only metric you're measured on is whether you've got publications or not. And then when you've got publications, once you get tenure, then everything's kind of up in the air and you do what you want. None of that had anything to do with generating real IP. It was getting publications. So that's the metric you measure on. The other thing that you're talking about changing the culture is you're changing the culture from a culture centered around the academicians to a culture now centered really around developing the students, which we all went to university, that's what we were told. But the reality was, when I was a grad student, I was a slave. And I worked really hard, and I put in my hours, and I got my degree, and I left and went into industry. if you're going to now start fostering the next generation of the entrepreneurs and innovators of the world, you're really going to have to change that cultural dynamic, and it's going to be very hard because the professors are not being rated on that dynamic right now. They're not being, there's no such, this is the report of all your grad students for the last 20 years and how much they either liked you or didn't like you. We had one guy in our group that, not our group, but he was in the department who'd been there for 8 years and wasn't any closer to getting his PhD than he was in year one because of various failures in the system. And, those are the things that would have to change to turn the university into really what we're talking about as a university as incubator model. And, the university is not going to have the same kind of money as the VCs are, but they can do something from a mentoring aspect and from creating professors who are the thought leaders you were talking about to then look at their 8 grad students and say, you guys are going to be the next generation of leaders. I'm going to give you some great information and some great tools, and now you're going to go out and you're going to start the next ZoneLogic, you're going to start the next Micron, and have fun with that.
So the final issue I want to chat about before we get the audience involved is what universities do with patents. So I mentioned Berkeley before. I believe they have been discussed as being one of the worst offenders in, I will use this word, patent troll-like behavior. There's lots of phrases, non-practicing entities or patent assertion entities. And the concept is the following. You use your patents strategically to extract revenues from others without ever having any involvement or intention in doing anything to create anything. Now, if you actually invent something and someone else licenses it from you and produce it, that's not what I'm talking about. But there is this reality that there are lots of organizations with lots of patents that can use them in lots of ways, and litigation sometimes becomes a tool for that. And there is today a divide in the university community between certain universities who are looking at this as an opportunity to bring in revenue, monetize their portfolio, versus those who say, wait a minute, our mission is to diffuse knowledge. We should be like Mayo, thinking about patents a little more critically. Let's talk a little bit about those differing perspectives. Russ, since you're nodding, I'll let you take the first whack at it.
Sorry. I'll use the T word because patent troll was first thrown out as a way of characterizing, in my mind, behavior. And being called a patent troll is different than acting like one. Acting like one tends to be looking at some assets that you have and finding a way late in the game, if you will. So it's behavior and timing to maximize the return on that asset. So you've got some patents, and this doesn't matter whether it's a single inventor who doesn't manufacture, it doesn't matter if it's a university or if it's a practicing company that has a lot of assets that it isn't actually practicing in its business, may never have. If a university is looking at a bunch of patents that they've accumulated over the years and now going back through the treasure chest and trying to find something and seeing if they can make it read on something that's happening in the industry and if you will, extort some revenue out of that, that puts them in a category that most of the rest of the ecosystem looks at as that's not right. You're neither transferring technology or encouraging business. Now you're just trying to go out and get something late in the game. If you're a tech transfer, to me, you should be working earlier on it. When you really want to bring value to industry, you're not only bringing them a patent, frankly, you're bringing them a patent application, you're bringing them researchers, you're bringing them access into the organization to maybe fund research and get benefits from it. You're bringing more to the table than just a patent. So it comes back, unfortunately, to the model. If it's a university that says, we're missing out on the Gatorade model, we need to, go get some revenue, and the revenue you get is going to fund the organization, I think that puts you more into that bucket of being accused of not playing fair.
Steve, one thing we talk about sometimes are norms. And in the university context, the norms around how to view patents are still developing, and certain actors have taken certain views, others. How do you see this all shaking out?
Well, patents, for one, is just one strategy. So when I was at Mayo, almost 50% of our licenses did not have a patent associated with them. And so the patent is not the end-all, be-all thing. I always joked, there was a patent for a comb-over. Men, how they do comb-overs. That was a real patent.
Interesting patent.
And so, half of the people in this room probably are in validation of that patent. But are you going to sue people because of that? And that was the Prometheus case. So Prometheus was going to sue physicians, individual physicians, if they used the test results for a specific test. And so the motivation of why you have a patent and what you do with the patent, to me, is the most important thing. If you're going to go out and try to sue physicians because they're going to use the test results to try and determine which treatment to use, that's why Mayo went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. That was not a cheap, inexpensive endeavor by the Mayo Clinic to do so, but they believed in it so strongly that they're on the.
Where'd that come from? Where'd that norm come from? And that was really putting your money where your mouth was. So was that leadership? Top down, bottom up, history, where did it come from?
It came from the fundamental belief of Mayo Clinic is the patient comes first. And so if you really believe that and you really follow that, the patient was not coming first. Profits were coming before patients. And so that's why I think I feel very strongly I'm not going to argue whether you should run your tech transfer office like a business or like a service to the faculty. What I would argue is you should pick and then stick to it. And the flip side, there are universities that will spend all kinds of public money on patents, but yet they won't defend them. So on that side, aren't you a fiduciary responsibility where you're spending the university's money on patents, but yet if you're not going to defend them, you just wasted the university's money, and that to me is wrong. Then you're not doing your fiduciary responsibility to do that. So you may get called a troll because you're suing somebody, but you have to really look deep under it on why you're suing somebody. And if the university is going to patent things, they better be able to and have the guts to defend it, in my opinion.
Julie?
So I was wondering if you read my notes here, because I said that this whole idea of patent trolling, if it's true, not if it's just perceived, it's a leadership issue. It is a cultural issue within the organization. I believe that if the leadership in the university should see what's going on, they have to be aware of tech transfer as part of that, and enforce the type of culture or leadership. What do they want their university to stand for? Is it truly about being a public benefit? Then looking at a transfer office that's doing nothing but being a troll, how is that helpful? And what are you teaching your students by that? I mean, I think it's a missed opportunity, a failed opportunity to not embrace the research that's going on and engage the students in it. I mean, what we're trying to do is teach the students how to learn. We're trying to teach them how to be innovative. And if we're missing an opportunity, if we're not taking advantage of the research that's going on, engaging the students in it, and looking at how that can be a benefit to society.
George?
Well, troll is something that I could go off on for hours, but the idea of a troll, to me, it's either a property right or it isn't. Nobody jumps up and down and says you built an apartment building without ever any intention of living in it, and now you're trying to monetize it by renting it out to people. The only difference with intellectual property in that model is somebody else showed up 5 years later and built the same apartment building, and now you're charging him rent. I have lots of clients, so the first thing they do when they run into a problem is go to the patent office and search it and figure out how other people address that problem, and it's working the way it's supposed to. We have an entire generation now that doesn't know to do that, and they just immediately go out and run a startup company, and they find out 3 years later that they're building something on ground that they don't own. But that's neither here nor there. The real issue for universities is, and I'll just put it bluntly, if you don't enforce your rights, then people are just going to take them, and that's just the fact. The first time, when anybody sends out a cease and desist letter, what we do is we go, how much money do they have? Can they go to the distance? And it's all business. So, if you're going to go through the process of getting patents, and the goal is to make money, and you're not willing to enforce, you're not going to make enough money. But if the goal is to communicate, the goal is to get on a patent on somebody's CV, if the goal is to prevent yourself from being sued for infringing the same technology 5 years later, then enforcement's not important.
Let's go to the audience with questions, and as promised, we want to start with the students. Any students want to volunteer?
Sure.
Nate?
My question is for Mr. Lewis. Thank you. Mr. Lewis, you mentioned that there needs to be a cultural dynamic change at the university level to prepare students properly for industry. Is that a correct characterization? Yes. So I'm a first-year law student, and I probably don't have a whole lot of influence on whether that happens or not. So my question is, what can I do to prepare myself for industry more effectively, and what can my classmates do?
In your situation, the best advice, and I give lots of advice, I mentor lots of law students, and I've mentored lots of engineers over the years. The best advice is to get out and get real-world experience. Don't take classes over the summer. Get an internship. You have an excellent opportunity as a student, and I'm sure CU does it, BU did it, where you can essentially get credits for working for free for some company. You know, pick a technology you like, pick a company you like, go call their general counsel on the phone and say, I want to work for you for free, and all you have to do is fill out 3 pieces of paper over the course of a semester. And that will give you more experience and prepare you more for the real world than anything you do inside these walls.
To be more specific, any students here interested in this topic and you don't want to do an externship for Kate or for Steve, you're making a mistake.
And all the other tech transfer offices out there.
Lots of other tech transfer, and the head of the tech transfer office at CSU is a grad of CU Law School. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities there, and it's a great place because you get a lot of responsibility. The type of work that Steve was talking about, that's the type of work you do. So it's great work, hands-on. Brian?
I was wondering if there'd be an opportunity, or you see an opportunity in kind of approaching the model that Tesla has recently put out there of opening up your IP.
This is a great question, which I think will be featured prominently in the next panel.
Oops. Sorry, am I jumping the gun?
That said, you've got some great people here. So, George, you hinted at the end, which is you said it's a strategy that people could say, we want to open up our IP. And one question is when you do that, to let's say encourage a network effect, more people using your technology, what approach should you take? It's a big decision for an enterprise to take. Universities could say, we're about knowledge and we're about getting it widely adopted, so we're going to patent it and then enable easy licensing. If a university said that's our model, what should they keep in mind? How should they think about it? What considerations? George, you want to go first?
Make it really easy. Don't think you're making it easy. If people are not coming to you and asking for licenses, you're not making it easy enough. And that's typically what I see, the ugly baby syndrome. I see people say, oh, I've got these assets, they're worth a ton, I'm just going to advertise them and the world will beat a path to my door. And if the path isn't beaten to your door, you didn't make it easy enough and your baby's not as pretty as you thought it was. And you just need to lower your standards, shall we say.
Steve, you want to add to that?
I would just comment that if you're going to go down that pathway, the more you would do that, the more business expertise you would actually need, because you need to make it easy to do that. And if you don't understand the business side of that, then you're not going to make it easy. You can find great science all over the world. I mean, every industry person that I deal with, it's not finding the great science. They can find that anywhere. Finding the good business practices that go along and integrate with that, now that's a tougher thing to do.
Phil, I would add that an entity like Tesla versus a university, Tesla has a lot of research that's going to come out that's very closely coupled to commercialization. It is much closer to that stage, and I think that's going to attract more licensing from other companies that are in that space, because as opposed to some fundamental research that comes out of the university, but it requires $200 million investment in another 10 years to actually get to the commercial phase. So opening it up at that stage is not necessarily going to. And you're also, there's a comment on the earlier panel that, you know, once that startup comes out of the university, then there's a lot of work to figure out what step 2 is going to look like that doesn't require me to pay the university based on that patent that they gave me. When you're closer to commercialization, there's less of an opportunity to design around on future. So I think the basis between the two are a little hard to compare.
Well, one question, and it goes back to Steve's comment earlier, how much non-patent licensing revenue can you get? So there is this theory that if you put the patents out there, made it truly easy, and then you invite people, hey, you want to know the know-how behind this? We have a separate deal for you. Is that something universities can pull off?
I would say no. That would be a difficult thing to do. At Mayo, we were very successful at it in very specific areas, and so it wasn't a broad commercialization strategy. It worked in very, very specific areas. But I would guess from a university standpoint, that'd be a hard thing to do.
Because this is part of the figuring out a tech transfer office model. There's the entrepreneurship perspective or bent. Then there's also the more larger industrial collaboration. And those are two very different worlds, both of which can involve patents, but the worlds are very different. Getting back to Steve, your have to choose model, can a university embrace both those models, or is it going to find itself betwixt and between?
Just in my experience, that if you try to do both of those things, it will get difficult and you'll run into problems. I personally believe that's why tech transfer offices get bad names, is because they're trying to be all of those things to all of those people, and they're not staying true to what the university or what their institution wants them to do and wants them to achieve as part of the organization.
Julie, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, no, I know entrepreneurs who've been in negotiation with a tech transfer office, and then a big corporation comes by and they get it licensed out from underneath them, and they've put in 6 months. They even maybe they had a provisional so that they could look at it, and it got licensed right out from underneath them. And is that entrepreneur going to go back to that tech transfer office? Or the reputation of that tech transfer office is, they're not entrepreneur friendly. And but the thing about the open source of the technology is that ideas, it's just like, okay, so Southwest, right? They'll say, here's our model, everybody can take a look at it, go ahead, use it if you want. The devil is in the details, and it's in the execution. There's so many ideas, people have very similar ideas, and then it's the actual execution of that idea into a commercial entity that makes the difference.
Just one other quick comment I always thought was really interesting talking to scientists. When you would talk about patents, I would say to the scientist, how many of you know that that's your constitutional right? That the patent is in the Constitution. And so you have a constitutional right to do that. Very few people, how many of you in this room knew?
This is the easy group.
Not that many.
Thomas Jefferson was the first overseer of patents. Okay? How many people knew that Abe Lincoln had a patent?
Do you know what for?
Wasn't something railroads?
No, it was a putter. It was for a riverboat. It was a paddle type form for a riverboat. And the only president that have a patent.
That's right.
How many people know that Einstein was a patent examiner?
Yeah, that's how I got started.
But it just brings up the point of when people say, well, we ought to be just giving this stuff away. It's been paid for by the taxpayer, and so why are you spending all this money on that? And I say, well, one, it's in the Constitution. So
it's also the Bayh-Dole Act requires setting up tech transfer offices with patenting as part of it. That said, I think there is flexibility in how you implement it. So I think universities could do it, but it's a challenge. Other questions?
And back to your why are you doing it?
Right, exactly right.
Back to that point.
Yeah, over here.
Hi, my name's Eric. I actually have a new small business in Boulder. It's called the Undesk, and I actually am right in the thick of a university sought us out to sort of develop and co-build a provisional patent that they already have. And it sounds like kind of the general underlying theme of what we're talking about today is the difference between, like the good guys and the bad guys, depending on what you want to do, like the trolls and the people that really want to help entrepreneurs and faculty really succeed. And so I keep on going back into my head thinking about, well, this is almost like choosing a partner, right? Like choosing a co-founder, choosing an investor in your company. Are they a smart investor, or are they just going to give you money and run? And so with that being known, how do you navigate, any pointers on how you navigate the waters that, from university to university, it seems very fragmented, right? I mean, there's no Wikipedia about, this university has this TTO that works this way. And, like, how do you know that? And obviously it's a lot of time and money and resources invested in, co-developing something. And there's a lot at stake. So
Eric, thank you for asking, because when Julie referred to the entrepreneur, I often think about it as the university faculty member inventor entrepreneur. What Julie introduced is a different scenario, which is Eric's scenario. An entrepreneur on the outside who has some ability to collaborate with the university inventor and the technology.
So one other thing I should probably add to that story is I think that this is kind of the underpinning of the reason why they sought us out, is because that our business type and model fits with within the SBIR or STTR sort of requirements. So right away, that's like a red flag to me, and maybe I'm just thinking of it in the wrong perspective, but that's...
No, Eric says a good question for the panel. Julie, this is obviously in her strike zone. If you're an entrepreneur thinking about working with the university, how do you approach what can feel like a black box challenge? It's a little like contracting with the federal government. It's like this whole other animal. How do you approach that?
Well, interestingly, my company was built on a similar model, but with a Fortune 100 company. So I worked with Procter & Gamble, and they paid me to develop software that I retained ownership for. Great model if anybody wants to do that. No equity given up. I got paid full, a couple $1 million to develop this. Oh, and then I went and sold it to other people. Great model.
Well, Procter & Gamble, by the way, is the poster child for open innovation. So we'll talk about the third panel.
I'm not sure that that's what this fell under, but I don't know that they knew what they had or what we were going to develop. But one of the ideas around it is, first of all, look at the partnership agreement. What you're getting out of it, and make sure that your rights that you're not a work for hire, to where you're just developing this and then they own it all. And because what are they going to do with it? Is the question. The argument that I used with Procter & Gamble is, I said, you're a manufacturer, you're not a software company. You don't know how to maintain software. Now, I gave them lifetime upgrades to the software, and we worked a good deal, but and then when I sold it, I gave them a little bit back. But really know what you can, what you're getting out of it, and make sure that you're protected, so that it doesn't necessarily have to be in the contract. Well, probably should be in the contract. Never mind. There's this whole Silicon Valley thing in my head that says contracts are bad. There's a lot of folks in Silicon Valley that say that non-disclosures are bad. It's an interesting culture. But I would make sure that you understand kind of what you're getting out of it and what you can do with it to build your business. Because at the end of the day, unless you just want to be a work for hire type of a company, which I'm guessing, and I wouldn't recommend, because there's actually greater value in building a product of value, make sure that you're getting what you need out of it.
Other points, sir?
I've worked with tech transfer groups before from the corporate side, and whether it's a tech transfer, whether it's another legal team in another corporation, your first impressions are important. You're going to tell when you're starting to deal with them, is this an organization that really has the best interest of both of us in mind, or just their best interest? Is this going, at the end of the day, is this just going to be a bad relationship? There is no list of every university and every, whether how they fit on that. There's no easy answer other than going into it and exploring it a bit and then making your decision based on that.
Maybe talking to other people who've worked with them.
Other questions? time for one more. I'm not afraid to call on another student if no one else does. All right, right here.
There's been a lot of discussion about some contention over whether or not the baby's ugly. And, and it sounds, the way we've been talking about it, as though it's something between the inventor and the tech transfer office is where this decision is made. And it's not. It's made with the customer, whoever's going to buy this thing in the first place. So, no, you're shaking your head.
No, I'm shaking my head. So that the baby is ugly means that what the inventor thinks he invented isn't worth anything or isn't patentable. Because he may have, I have a lot of people come in and say, oh, I invented a cell phone that turns itself off if it senses it's moving more than 1 mile an hour. Like, okay, that was invented 30 years ago, but to convince him of that is really hard. The patent is a business tool. One of the things it can do is increase the amount of money you make when you sell the company or the value of the company. The company itself has to be valuable first or the patent's worthless. And so that's one thing that I think what you're getting at. If the product isn't going to sell, the fact that you have a patent on it isn't going to make you valuable. It's not a lottery ticket. You're not going to send your kids to Oxford because you got a patent. You've actually got to then take the idea and make it worth something, and then the patent will make it worth more. It's like a force multiplier that way. But if you don't have a patent and it's relatively easy to re-engineer, then all you did was create a market that other people are going to steal. And so everybody's going to flood in with knockoffs and counterfeits, and now you can't protect yourself, and you go out of business because there's always somebody who can do it cheaper than you can. But the product itself has to be worth something.
I think the baby is ugly kind of brings to the surface the issue that the reaction that you get from the person. But the underlying questions are, what's the strategy for that intellectual property? How's it going to be used? Should it be patented? Is it valuable to an external? Not the personal value to the inventor, but having to have that discussion with them of what's the, what value is it to the university? What value is it to the company? What value is it to them? If it was, I like to say this, that, and again, we've said a few times, patents are just one of the tools, but if you had a small landscaping business, why would you go out and spend a $50,000 dump truck if you didn't have plans on how to use that dump truck to get a return on your investment? You come up with a great idea. Why would you or the university or the business invest a lot of money into protecting that with a patent if there's not a plan on how to achieve whatever goal it is that you or the entity have?
That's great in theory, but that's not the way it works in the university. I mean, how many people walk into the tech transfer office with no business plan whatsoever, but want to patent something? I mean, that happens every day.
Sure, and I struggle with this in the corporate world, but a patent for public recognition is useless. You spend a lot of money on it. You don't spend enough money on it to make it valuable, but you spend a lot of money on it just so you got a plaque on a wall. That's a hard decision or a hard discussion to have with an inventor and say, that's great, we really value you. We would rather you publish that in an academic journal to get the recognition and to get it as prior art than to file a patent on it. But there has to be a strategy somewhere. And we can't answer that today, what the right strategy for the university is, but there has to be one.
There's a flip side of the question, which let me get at, which is, what if someone says, I've invented something, and the tech transfer says, yeah, maybe you get a patent on it, but I don't think it's worth that much. At that point, do we say to the inventor, if you want to pay for this yourself, we will treat you differently than if we said we are going to exercise the rights to pay for it ourselves? So famously, Steve Wozniak was working at Hewlett-Packard when he invented the personal computer. He went to Hewlett-Packard as his contract required, and they said, we think this is not that interesting. Who's going to want to use a personal computer? You can do this on your own. Right? So the university that makes that mistake, bad on the university, but at least they haven't stopped it from getting to the marketplace.
Sure. Right.
And so that
can fit into Dr. Gold's model of, if the right professor with the right business acumen wants to take it out of the university and be that entity that actually takes it to the market. Maybe it's a Fortune 100 company that's the right fit for that technology. Maybe it's a startup. Maybe that fits into that category and is one of the options to say, 3M didn't think sticky pads were patentable, and they didn't see why. Well, actually, 3M didn't think that glue that didn't stick very well was worth patenting, so they didn't. But they built their business on their trademark. And
so the point that I was hoping to make or ask about was that the words customer validation rarely come up in the tech transfer office. And maybe they should start. I mean, that's where you would figure out whether or not there's a use for it in the first place.
Right, and I think one of you were talking about that you have patent committees that bring in other people to take a look at it. And I know at Johns Hopkins APL, they bring in investors and entrepreneurs to help decide whether or not they're going to patent something, so that they have some industry knowledge. To your point about the alternative uses, this was invented for this, but it has all of these other potential. And that would be the ideal scenario, is to bring in folks from the outside who maybe have that industry or business expertise to brainstorm around whether or not it's a viable potential commercial product.
I think
with that knowledge.
One, I think it's what drives inventors crazy is when you call their baby ugly, but then you don't want to give it back to them.
Yeah.
And so you're
That is true.
so you're not going to work on it. Let me get this right. If I'm an inventor, you're not going to work on it, but you won't give it back to me. And so I believe that a tech transfer office should do really two things in this particular area. One is let the marketplace decide. So that's to your point. And so you really need to go out to the marketplace. Let the marketplace decide. But if you're not going to work on it, you want to give it back to them as fast as possible so they have a fighting chance to do something. What goes absolutely wrong in there's no win for anybody in this, is when the tech transfer hangs on to it, thinking that they might just be missing something here, and yet they won't do anything about it. That does absolutely no one any good. And so if you're not going to work on it, the marketplace says, or whatever reason you're not going to work on it, you ought to, as quickly as possible, give it back to them. And if you're not wrong every once in a while, you're probably hanging on to things too long.
That's a great note to end on. Let's thank this panel for a wonderful discussion.